It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. My baby shower, an event I had been looking forward to for months. The excitement was in the air, the house decorated beautifully, and everyone who mattered was there to celebrate with me. But I should have known that nothing with my family would ever go smoothly. It started off normal, with everyone enjoying the food and chatting. But there was one person who was making my blood boil even before the day had really begun. My sister. As usual, she was trying to draw all the attention to herself, making everything about her, even though it was my special day. She kept hovering around, talking to everyone, but not really contributing. I let it slide at first, thinking maybe I was just being sensitive. But things took a turn when I started opening my gifts. You know how it is. Everyone gathers around, watching you unwrap each present. A few thoughtful things, a few funny ones, but each gift was a little token of love for my baby. And then it happened. I opened a beautiful gift from my best friend, an expensive baby crib set with everything from sheets to a little mobile. I could feel everyone's eyes on it, and then I saw her. My sister was standing too close, her eyes lingering on the crib set for a little too long. At first, I thought it was just her usual way of showing envy, but I was wrong. The next thing I knew, she was too close to the gift table. She started picking things up, moving them around like they were hers. "Oh, this is such a nice blanket," she said, as she picked up a plush baby blanket from the pile of gifts. I looked at her, confused, and said, "That's mine, actually." She quickly brushed it off, her face flushed with some kind of hidden guilt, and returned to the group. But I could see it in her eyes. Something wasn't right. At that moment, I thought it was nothing more than her usual behavior. I let it go and continued on, trying to make the best of the day. But as the party started winding down, I began to notice that things were missing. The crib set, a few smaller items, and even some cash gifts. It didn't take long before I figured out what had happened. She had taken them. My sister, the person who should have been celebrating with me, had stolen my baby gifts. My heart sank, and I felt this intense mixture of betrayal, disbelief, and rage. I knew I had to act fast before she disappeared with the things that were meant for my baby. I walked over to her, trying to remain calm, but the anger was building inside. "Where are my gifts?" I asked. Her face went pale, and for the first time I saw her look nervous, genuinely nervous. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, avoiding my eyes. But I wasn't buying it. I had already seen the bags under her eyes, the guilt that she couldn't hide. It was clear now that she wasn't just trying to ruin my day for attention. She had planned to take what she thought she could get away with. That's when I decided to confront her in front of everyone. "I know what you did," I said, my voice rising. "I'm not going to let you take what's meant for my baby." Everyone in the room turned silent, the realization dawning on them. My sister was caught, and she couldn't hide it any longer. The anger in her eyes was replaced with panic as the truth settled in. My best friend, who had been the one to buy the crib set, stepped forward, her face red with anger. "Evelyn's right," she said. "You can't just take what doesn't belong to you." And that was when the confrontation escalated. My sister began to apologize, but it was too late. I had lost all the trust I had in her, and the betrayal stung more than anything else she had ever done. As she scrambled for an excuse, I knew that this would never be something I could forgive easily. This was no longer just about stealing gifts. It was about showing no respect for me, for my family, and for the love and generosity that had been given to me. The consequences were immediate. She left in disgrace, and my family looked at her in shock. I wasn't just hurt, I was done. I had tried for years to be the bigger person, to let her be who she was, but this crossed a line, and I would never allow myself to be disrespected in this way again. In the end, my baby shower didn't go the way I had planned, but the lesson was clear. Sometimes betrayal comes from the ones you least expect. And when someone tries to take what's yours, you don't just sit back and let them. You take control. That day, I learned that no matter how hard you try to keep the peace, you have to stand up for what's yours. And I would never let anyone disrespect me or my family again. I took control of the situation, and I exposed the truth for everyone to see. That's the power you hold when you refuse to be a victim. The fallout from that day was more than I had anticipated. My sister didn't just steal my gifts, she stole my trust. That was the hardest part. I had always been there for her, supporting her through everything, but when it mattered most, she chose to betray me in front of everyone. The embarrassment was real, not just for her, but for me. And what hurt the most was that it wasn't even about the gifts. It was about the disrespect she had shown me and the total disregard for our relationship as sisters. After the confrontation, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was the image of her, casually taking what wasn't hers, thinking she could get away with it. I felt this overwhelming sense of hurt. My mind kept replaying the day, the moment she was caught, but the truth was clear. Nothing would ever be the same between us. My husband, who had witnessed the entire thing, stood by my side the whole time, offering support. But I could see the disappointment in his eyes, too. He had been hoping that his family would respect me and celebrate with me, but what had happened was far from it. His family, especially my sister, had crossed a line, and it was painful to see how easily they thought they could get away with something like this. I couldn't understand how someone who was supposed to be close to me, who knew me better than anyone else, could do something so heartless. I realized then that betrayal isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's the small, subtle actions that cut the deepest. Actions that chip away at the trust you once had until it's too late to rebuild. The next few days were difficult. My sister tried to reach out, sending messages filled with apologies and promises to make things right. But it felt empty to me. How could I trust someone who had stolen from me in such a blatant way? She had stolen not just gifts, but a piece of my heart. The part of me that believed family would never turn on me like that. I kept telling myself that I needed to forgive her, that I needed to move on for the sake of family, but I wasn't ready. Forgiveness takes time, and I wasn't willing to give it too easily. I had learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means taking control over your own emotional state and choosing to move forward. But moving forward didn't mean going back to the way things were before. It meant creating a new relationship, a different kind of trust, if I ever chose to have one with her again. As the days went by, I began to focus more on my family and the love they had shown me. Despite the betrayal, I had a strong network of people who truly cared about me. The baby shower may have been tainted by my sister's actions, but the love and generosity I received from my friends, my husband, and even some family members who supported me, that's what mattered most. It was hard to come to terms with the fact that my sister had changed the dynamics of our relationship, but I knew I had to protect my peace. Sometimes it's not about what's been taken from you, but about what you're willing to rebuild from what remains. The road to healing was long, but I had already made the most important decision. I was not going to let anyone, not even family, take away my sense of self-worth. I didn't know what the future held for my sister and me. Would we ever be close again? I didn't know. But what I did know was that I was strong enough to move on, to not let this betrayal define me. And that's a lesson I would carry with me forever. The weeks that followed the baby shower were filled with a mixture of emotions. The initial shock of my sister's betrayal slowly faded, but the lingering anger still had a hold on me. I could no longer look at her the same way. Every apology, every "I'm sorry" she sent my way felt hollow, like an attempt to brush away something deep and irreversible. It wasn't the stolen gifts that hurt me the most. It was the realization that she had crossed a line that family simply shouldn't cross. She had tried to take what wasn't hers, and it wasn't just about the material things. It was about the trust we had shared as sisters, a trust that had been shattered in a single moment. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that forgiveness wasn't a light switch. It wasn't something I could just turn on because someone asked for it. As much as I loved my sister, I had to face the truth. Some actions have consequences, and this one was no small thing. I knew that to truly heal, I had to let go of any expectations I had about our relationship. For now, I couldn't trust her. I couldn't pretend that things were okay. Maybe one day I could forgive her, but it would take time, time that I wasn't willing to rush. I took solace in the love and support from those who truly cared about me. My husband, of course, stood by me through it all. He was disgusted by his family's actions, and he supported whatever decision I made regarding my sister. But more importantly, he reminded me of my worth. He reminded me that this situation, no matter how painful, didn't define me. I was more than this betrayal. I had my own strength, and that was something no one could take from me. In the midst of all this, I started to focus on myself and my pregnancy. I had let my sister's actions overshadow the joy I should have felt about the new chapter in my life, and I wasn't going to let that continue. I started looking forward to the future with my baby, to the life we would build as a family. It wasn't going to be perfect, and there would be challenges along the way, but I was determined to embrace every moment. I also took time to reflect on what I had learned. Betrayal, though painful, had taught me something important. You cannot control others' actions, but you can control how you respond to them. I realized that the way I handled this situation would set the tone for my future, both in terms of relationships and personal growth. I couldn't keep living in anger or resentment. That wouldn't serve me or my baby. In the end, I chose peace. I chose to surround myself with the people who lifted me up, who cared about me for who I was. My sister had taken the low road, but I wasn't going to let her mistakes keep me in that place. Life was too short to hold on to bitterness. I would face whatever came my way, but I was done letting people who didn't have my best interests at heart have any control over my happiness. Would things ever be the same with my sister? I didn't know. But for now, I had taken control of my peace, and that was enough. And one day, when I was ready, maybe we could rebuild what was broken, but only if it was on a foundation of trust and respect. Until then, I would continue to grow and embrace the love that truly mattered. the love I had earned. As the months passed, I felt like I had finally found a sense of balance again. The anger that once burned so intensely had dulled to a simmering ache. It wasn't gone, and perhaps it never would be, but it no longer ruled my thoughts. I had focused on my healing, on preparing for the arrival of my baby, and slowly I began to embrace the peace I had fought so hard to achieve. My sister's betrayal still haunted me, but it was no longer something that consumed me. It was something I had learned to live with. I wasn't going to let her actions define my life. I had learned that holding on to grudges wasn't the answer. The one person I had to forgive in all of this was myself. I had to stop blaming myself for the choices she made and accept that I couldn't control her actions, only how I responded to them. And yet, there were still moments when I found myself thinking about her, wondering if she even realized the gravity of what she had done. Part of me wanted her to understand the damage she'd caused, to truly see the hurt she'd inflicted. But I had to let go of the idea that she would ever apologize the way I needed her to. Some things weren't meant to be fixed, and not everyone would acknowledge the hurt they caused. My focus shifted to what mattered most: my family. My husband and I were growing stronger, learning how to navigate the complexities of this new chapter in our lives. Pregnancy had brought its challenges, but it also brought us closer. We had been through so much together, and now, with our baby on the way, we were focused on creating a home filled with love and security. We had learned the hard way that relationships required more than just love. They required trust, communication, and, above all, respect. We both had our flaws, but we were working together, learning to support each other in ways we hadn't before. I saw the effort he was putting in to be the partner I needed, and I was putting in the same effort to make sure that we built something solid, something unshakable. I also began to rediscover pieces of myself that had been lost in the turmoil. I wasn't just someone's sister or someone's wife. I was me. I started taking time for myself again, doing things that brought me joy, things I had put off for far too long. I began reading more, reconnecting with old friends, and making plans for the future that didn't just involve my role as a mother or a wife, but as a woman who deserved to live fully and authentically. As my due date neared, I felt a sense of anticipation, not only for the birth of my child, but for what was to come beyond that. I knew the future wouldn't always be easy, but I was ready. I had learned that I could handle whatever life threw my way. The betrayal, the hurt, the anger, those things no longer defined me. What defined me was my ability to rise above it, to forgive myself and others, and to create the life I wanted. For the first time in a long time, I was genuinely excited about the future. Whatever it held, I knew I had the strength to face it. I had taken control of my story, and now it was time to write the next chapter. I was ready for whatever came next, and I knew that with the love of my husband, the support of the people who truly mattered, and the peace I had fought so hard for, nothing could stand in my way. The early days of motherhood were an overwhelming mix of joy, exhaustion, and intense love. The moment my baby arrived, my world shifted, and I was completely captivated by this tiny little person who had already changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. Every smile, every little coo, every grasp of my finger reminded me of just how much this little being meant to me, and how much I was willing to protect them from anything that could harm them. even the people who had hurt me. I knew that life as I knew it had forever changed. But what surprised me the most was how much peace I had found within myself. I wasn't the same person I had been months ago, and I was no longer obsessed with the betrayal from my sister or the toxic relationships that had once consumed me. The love I felt for my child filled every empty space in my heart, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole again. But even with all the love and joy my baby brought, I couldn't ignore the reality of what had happened with my sister. The tension still lingered in the background, and no matter how much I tried to let go of it, the resentment remained. I had to come to terms with the fact that some relationships would never be the same. I couldn't just forget the way she had betrayed me, but I didn't want to be controlled by it either. I needed to find a way to move forward without letting her actions define the person I was becoming. At the same time, my relationship with my husband grew stronger. Having a child together forced us to rely on each other in ways we hadn't before. We had our struggles, of course. No marriage is perfect. But the love and commitment we shared felt more solid than it ever had. We were partners in every sense of the word, and I could feel the strength of our bond deepening with each passing day. There were moments when I looked at my husband, grateful for his presence in my life. He had been by my side through it all, the betrayal, the emotional turmoil, the heartbreak. And now, he was helping me navigate the challenges of parenthood with patience and understanding. Our connection had been tested, but we were stronger than ever. We had both learned the importance of communication, of trust, and of showing up for each other no matter what. I also started thinking about the kind of mother I wanted to be. My journey had taught me many valuable lessons about resilience, forgiveness, and strength. I knew that I wanted to raise my child with those same values. I wanted them to understand the importance of self-respect, of standing up for what's right, and of never allowing anyone to take away their sense of worth. It was in these quiet moments, as I held my baby close and felt the weight of my responsibilities as a mother, that I realized something incredibly important. My past didn't have to define me. I could choose to let it go, to move forward, and to build a future filled with love, peace, and happiness. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would never allow anyone, family or not, to come between me and the life I was creating for myself and my child. The future was no longer clouded with the pain of the past. I had reclaimed my power, my peace, and my happiness. And now I was ready to embrace the journey ahead, whatever it held. As the weeks turned into months, I settled into my new role as a mother, finding joy in the everyday moments that seemed small but were, in reality, everything. My baby's first laugh, the way their eyes brightened as they looked at me, the quiet moments late at night when everything was still. Those were the moments I lived for now. There was a peace in the simplicity of motherhood that I hadn't anticipated. It felt like everything had come full circle. The chaos, the heartbreak, the betrayal, none of that mattered anymore. But while I was navigating the joy of motherhood, the past still had a way of creeping into my thoughts. I had chosen to move forward, but I wasn't naive enough to think that the pain from my sister's betrayal would simply disappear. I thought about it often, especially when I was alone. She had been a huge part of my life for so long, and now she felt like a stranger. I knew I had to address the elephant in the room, especially for the sake of my own peace. There was a lingering feeling of unfinished business, and I wasn't sure if it was something I could ignore. I couldn't allow this unresolved tension to overshadow the new life I was trying to build with my husband and baby. It was time to confront the situation, not because I owed it to her, but because I owed it to myself to finally let go of the weight she had put on my heart. I decided to reach out to her. It wasn't easy. I had spent so much time building walls between us, trying to protect myself from further pain. But I knew that confronting her, having a conversation about what had happened, was the only way to truly heal. I wasn't looking for an apology. I wasn't even sure I wanted one. What I needed was clarity. I needed to know where we stood. And more importantly, I needed to know if we could ever rebuild what we once had. When she agreed to meet, I was anxious, unsure of what the conversation would hold. I had spent so many nights thinking about the right words to say, but when the moment arrived, I found that the truth was simpler than I had anticipated. I looked at her, the person who had betrayed me, and said, I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I need to know if we can move forward, if we can start fresh. I can't live in this anger anymore. Her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, I saw genuine remorse. She admitted to the things she had done, to the lies she had told, and to the ways she had hurt me. But that wasn't what shocked me the most. It was when she said, I was jealous. I didn't know how to handle your success, your life, your happiness. I was afraid of losing you. In that moment, I realized something important. Her betrayal wasn't just about greed or malice. It was about fear, fear of being left behind. And while that didn't justify her actions, it gave me a new perspective. The conversation wasn't easy, but it was necessary. By the time we finished talking, we weren't closer, but we weren't as far apart as we had been. There was still work to do, still hurt to heal, but I felt lighter. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of resentment. I had acknowledged the pain, confronted it, and made peace with it. The next step was rebuilding. I didn't know what that looked like yet, but I knew it would take time. For now, I was focused on the present, the love of my husband, the joy of being a mother, and the future we were building together. The past didn't define me anymore. I had taken control, and now I was free to move forward. As I looked at my baby, I knew that my child would grow up in a world of love, not bitterness, and that was the greatest gift I could give. As the months went by, life began to feel more like it was falling into place. I was no longer consumed by anger or resentment. The healing process was slow, but it was real, and it was happening. My focus was on the present, the love I had for my husband, the joy of raising our baby, and the stability we had begun to create in our home. But despite the progress, there were still times when I was reminded of my sister's betrayal. Even though we had talked, even though I had made the decision to move forward, I couldn't deny that some things had shifted irreparably. The trust between us had been shattered, and while I could forgive her actions, the damage had been done. We had talked about rebuilding, but the reality of what that meant started to sink in. Could I really forgive her, truly? Could I really open myself up to her again, knowing what she had done? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that forgiveness wasn't just for her, it was for me. I couldn't carry the weight of this betrayal forever. I had already let go of the anger, but in some ways I was still holding on to the hurt. I couldn't allow that to keep me stuck. I wanted to be free, free from the anger, free from the bitterness, and free from the past. that was the only way I could fully embrace the future. One day, while I was rocking my baby to sleep, I thought about my sister again. It had been months since our conversation, and I realized that I hadn't truly moved on. There was still a small piece of me that was hesitant, still unsure about opening that door again. I wanted to move forward, but I was afraid. Afraid that letting my guard down would leave me vulnerable. Afraid that I would be hurt again. And in that fear, I realized something important. I was still holding myself back. I spent the next few days reflecting on this. I realized that I had been trying to protect myself by staying distant, but in doing so, I was also denying myself the chance for healing. I had to stop hiding behind my walls. I had to stop letting fear control me. Yes, I had been hurt, and yes, my sister had broken my trust. But in holding on to that hurt, I was only prolonging my own pain. It was time to take a leap of faith, not just for her, but for me. I decided to reach out to her again. This time, I wasn't looking for an apology. I wasn't looking for answers or closure. I was looking for peace. I needed to know if we could move forward, not just as family, but as individuals who had learned from our mistakes. The past couldn't be erased, but maybe, just maybe, we could create something new. When she agreed to meet, I felt a mix of emotions. But the most overwhelming feeling was hope. Hope that things could improve. Hope that we could rebuild something. Hope that we could finally move beyond the betrayal and create a new chapter in our relationship. We met in a quiet cafe, both of us tentative, unsure of what to expect. But when we sat down across from each other, it was different. She looked at me with an openness I hadn't seen before, and I could see the regret in her eyes. This time, the conversation wasn't just about what had happened. It was about how we could move forward, how we could heal, and how we could rebuild trust. It wasn't easy, but it was real. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. And for the first time in months, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was the first step toward healing for both of us. I wasn't sure what the future held for our relationship, but I was finally ready to let go of the past and embrace what came next. The lesson here was clear. True healing comes from the willingness to face your pain, to let go of what holds you back, and to take a chance on something new. And in doing so, you create space for growth, peace, and the possibility of new beginnings. As the days passed, I began to feel a sense of closure starting to settle within me. The weight I had carried around for months, thanks to the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the emotional toll it took, seemed to slowly lift. But it wasn't just about my sister or the situation anymore. It was about how I was choosing to move forward in my life, how I was choosing to heal. After that heartfelt conversation with my sister, I realized that healing is a journey, not a destination. I had thought that once I forgave her or made peace with it, everything would simply fall into place. But I was wrong. Healing took time, patience, and an open heart, something I hadn't expected to need, but something I was learning to embrace. My relationship with my sister wasn't fixed overnight. There were still moments when I would question whether or not I could truly trust her again. But what I began to understand was that trust wasn't a light switch. It was something that had to be rebuilt, step by step, and only when both of us were willing to work at it. As I focused on this, I also realized that I couldn't let my sister's actions overshadow the life I had now. I had a family to protect, a new life to nurture, and a future to build. My baby needed me to be whole, not fragmented by past wounds. And though I was still uncertain about the role my sister would play in my life, I knew that my focus had to shift to what truly mattered. The love I had for my husband, the joy of watching our child grow, and the lessons I had learned through everything. It was time to put my energy into those things. My baby was my priority. And as much as the betrayal had cut me deep, I wasn't going to allow it to take any more of my mental and emotional space. I found myself thinking less and less about my sister's actions and more about the love I had for my child, the future we were creating as a family. It was as though my perspective had finally shifted. The pain that once consumed me no longer had the same power. I had learned to reclaim my peace, to stand firm in my worth, and to choose my family and my happiness over anything else. There were moments, of course, when I felt a sting. When I'd see something or hear a story that reminded me of the past, I'd feel that pang of hurt, but I had learned not to let it control me anymore. I had built something far stronger in its place, and I knew that I didn't need anyone's approval or validation to feel at peace with who I was becoming. In those quiet moments at home, watching my husband interact with our baby, I was reminded of what true love and support felt like. This was my family. We had weathered storms together, and now we were stronger for it. The bond we shared was unbreakable, and as I held my baby close, I realized that I was exactly where I needed to be. The lesson I learned was simple. The past doesn't define you. Your response to it does. It's not about what happens to you, but how you choose to grow from it. I had been through betrayal, heartbreak, and confusion, but I had also come through the other side with more strength, more clarity, and a renewed sense of what truly matters. My family, my peace, and the love that filled our home, these were the things that would carry me forward. And I knew now that no one could take that away from me. As time passed, the pieces of my life began to fit together more seamlessly. The emotional chaos that had once overwhelmed me was gradually replaced with a deeper sense of clarity and understanding. I had learned a lot in the past few months, not just about my sister or my family, but about myself. The lessons I had gleaned were invaluable, and they shaped the way I approached every day from that point forward. The process of forgiving wasn't just about releasing the anger toward my sister, it was about embracing my own growth. I had spent years allowing myself to be defined by the people around me, whether it was my family, my role as a wife, or the expectations placed on me by others. But now, I realized that the only definition I needed to accept was my own. I had to stop seeking approval from others to feel worthy. I had to trust that I was enough, just as I was. I had also come to understand that healing wasn't about putting everything back the way it was. It was about moving forward. The damage from my sister's betrayal wasn't something that could be undone. No matter how many apologies we exchanged, no matter how many tears were shed, that chapter of my life had closed. But the future was still unwritten, and it was up to me to decide what story I wanted to tell from that point on. I continued to focus on my growing family. My baby, my husband, and I. This was my core now. This was where my energy belonged. My sister's actions had once consumed me, but I no longer allowed them to. I spent my days building a life filled with love, security, and trust. Every milestone my baby reached was a reminder of what really mattered. The joy of seeing my child grow, the peaceful moments shared with my husband, and the love that blossomed between us. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I had made the right choices. It wasn't just about my sister. It was about the difficult relationships in my life, the ones that were strained, the ones where trust had been broken. I had learned that not all relationships were meant to be repaired. Some people simply weren't meant to be in my life, and I had to accept that. There was no room for toxicity, no space for those who would bring me down. I realized that it was okay to walk away. I didn't have to fix everything. I didn't have to save everyone. It wasn't my responsibility to carry the burden of other people's actions. What I could control was how I chose to respond, how I chose to protect my peace and my family. In the quiet moments, I would reflect on everything that had happened: the pain, the betrayal, the lessons. I had learned and grown from each experience. But what stood out the most was the strength I had discovered in myself. I wasn't the woman I had once been. I had learned to set boundaries, to speak up, and to embrace the love and support that came from the people who truly cared about me. And that, more than anything, was the greatest lesson I had learned: that my peace, my happiness, and my future were mine to shape. I was no longer a prisoner to the past, and I was determined to embrace the life that awaited me with open arms. No one could take that away from me. As I continued to navigate the ups and downs of motherhood, I found myself growing stronger in ways I hadn't imagined. The baby was a constant source of joy, reminding me of the beauty and innocence in life, even when everything around me seemed to be clouded with past struggles. I looked at my child and realized how much I had to be grateful for, how much love I had in my life, even after everything that had happened. But while my focus was on the present, I couldn't ignore the lingering questions in my mind about the future. What was my relationship with my sister going to look like? Could we truly rebuild what had been broken? And if so, was it worth trying? It wasn't that I wanted to hold on to the past. I had already decided I wouldn't. But I wasn't sure where to go from here. The one thing I was sure of was that I wasn't going to force anything. I wasn't going to rush into forgiveness for the sake of family. I had learned that healing took time, and rebuilding trust took even longer. I needed to be patient, not just with her, but with myself. We both had scars to heal, and the wounds from our past weren't going to vanish in an instant. They would take time to fade, if they ever did. In the meantime, I focused on creating the kind of environment I wanted for my child: one of love, security, and respect. I wanted my child to grow up knowing the value of honesty and integrity, but also understanding that life wasn't always simple. There would be times when people hurt you, times when life didn't go the way you planned, but how you responded, how you chose to move forward, was what mattered most. And so I continued on my journey of self-discovery. As I spent time with my baby, I realized how much I had lost touch with my own needs in the past. I had been so focused on trying to make others happy, trying to please everyone around me, that I had forgotten to care for myself. I had forgotten how to listen to my own voice, but now I was learning to give myself the love and attention I had always given to others. I began to carve out time for the things that brought me joy. I rekindled my love for reading, something I had let slip away during the busy months leading up to the baby's arrival. I also started to rediscover the hobbies I had abandoned long ago: painting, writing, simple things that helped me reconnect with myself. It wasn't about escaping my reality. It was about creating space to breathe, to think, and to simply be. And as I reconnected with the things that made me happy, I started to see my sister's betrayal in a new light. I realized that while her actions were hurtful, they no longer had the power to define my happiness. I wasn't living in her shadow anymore. I was living for me, for my family, and the life we were building. It was a life filled with love, filled with the joy of motherhood, and the strength that comes from embracing your own worth. As the months continued to pass, I found myself less focused on what I had lost and more focused on what I had gained. I had learned valuable lessons about forgiveness, about standing up for myself, and about finding peace in the midst of chaos. I knew that I would continue to face challenges, but I was no longer afraid. I had the strength to face whatever came next. I had already faced the hardest parts of my journey, and I had emerged stronger. And in that strength, I found my true sense of peace. No matter what happened with my sister, no matter what the future held, I knew one thing for sure. I was finally in control of my own happiness, and that was all that mattered. As I stood in front of the mirror one evening, holding my baby in my arms, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short time. The past year had been a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, healing, forgiveness, and the profound changes that come with motherhood. And through it all, I had learned that life's challenges are not here to defeat us, but to teach us. I looked down at my baby, their tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and in that moment, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This little one was the reason I kept going, the reason I pushed through the tough days, the sleepless nights, and the emotional roller coaster of the past. I had learned that motherhood wasn't just about providing for your child physically. It was about nurturing their emotional well-being, teaching them how to grow strong and resilient, traits that I had spent the last year learning to embrace myself. Despite everything that had happened with my sister, I knew that I was the person who was responsible for creating a peaceful, loving environment for my baby. My role as a mother was one of protection and growth, not just for my child, but for myself as well. I was determined to break the cycles of negativity and toxic behavior that had marred my past. My baby deserved better, and I was ready to give it. But as time passed, I also began to realize that true healing isn't just about letting go of the past. It's about changing the way you view yourself and your future. For so long, I had defined myself by the hurt I had experienced: the betrayal from my sister, the disappointment of seeing the people I loved turn on me. Those experiences had shaped the way I viewed myself, even in ways I hadn't realized. But now I had an opportunity to redefine myself, to see myself not as a victim of circumstances, but as a person who had survived and emerged stronger. I no longer identified with the pain I had endured. Instead, I embraced the lessons it had taught me. I had learned how to set boundaries. I had learned how to say no to the things that didn't serve me, how to stop seeking approval from people who didn't have my best interests at heart. I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to others' opinions of me. My value came from within, and that was something no one could ever take away. I had spent so much of my life trying to make others happy, bending over backward to fit into molds that weren't meant for me. But now I knew that the only person whose happiness truly mattered was my own. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living for me, not for anyone else, but for me and the family I had created. As the days passed, I became more focused on building a life that aligned with my true values: love, honesty, integrity, and peace. I knew that challenges would come, and I would face them with the same strength and resilience that had gotten me this far. But I also knew that no matter what happened, I was stronger than anything the world could throw my way. And as I looked at my baby, growing every day and becoming more of the person they were meant to be, I couldn't help but smile. I was exactly where I was meant to be, ready to write the next chapter of my life. The past no longer defined me. I was ready to embrace the future, knowing that I was in control of my own happiness, and that was a power I would carry with me forever. As the weeks went by, I began to find a new rhythm in life. The first few months of motherhood had been a blur of sleepless nights and constant care, but I had settled into a routine. My baby's giggles, first steps, and milestones became the center of my world, and I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the life I was building. Every day felt like a fresh start, and I was determined to make it count. But as I settled into the comfort of this new chapter, there were still moments when I reflected on the past, especially my sister. Though we had talked and made an effort to repair what had been broken, I knew that rebuilding a relationship after betrayal took more than just words. It took time, effort, and understanding. And while I had forgiven her in my heart, I wasn't sure if I could ever completely forget what she had done. The trust that had been shattered would take longer to rebuild, if it ever truly could. Still, I refused to let it weigh me down. I had already chosen to move forward, to focus on what truly mattered, and that was my family and the future we were creating. I wasn't going to let the past dictate my happiness, especially not when I had a beautiful baby to care for, a marriage to nurture, and a life to live. My baby was teaching me to embrace the present, to appreciate each moment, no matter how small, and to find joy in the ordinary. My relationship with my husband continued to strengthen. We had learned so much about each other, not just through the ups, but through the downs, too. Parenthood had tested us in ways we never anticipated, but it had also brought us closer. We were partners in every sense of the word, navigating the challenges of life as a team. There were moments of exhaustion, frustration, and doubt, but there were also moments of pure, unfiltered joy. Watching him interact with our child, watching the love and patience he had for both of us, reminded me of how lucky I was to have him by my side. As I continued to focus on what mattered most, my family, I also made an effort to reconnect with myself. For so long, I had been defined by what others thought of me, by the role I was expected to play in my family. But as I took time for myself, I began to rediscover who I was outside of those expectations. I started to pursue my passions again: writing, painting, and simply being creative. I realized that I needed to nourish my own soul, not just for myself, but for my family. When I was at peace with who I was, it allowed me to be a better mother and wife. One evening, as I sat with my baby in my arms, watching the sun set outside, I realized how far I had come. I had overcome the pain of betrayal, learned to set boundaries, and rediscovered my worth. The woman I was now was not the woman who had been betrayed months ago. I had grown stronger, more resilient, and more at peace with myself. And though my sister's betrayal would always be a part of my story, I no longer let it define me. I had taken control of my life, and with that control, I had built something far more important, a life filled with love, strength, and resilience. The past no longer had a hold over me, and as I looked at my baby, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to handle it. As I continued to move forward, the realization hit me more profoundly each day. The future was mine to shape. My baby had brought a fresh perspective on life, helping me see that the past, no matter how painful, could not define who I was or who I was becoming. My focus was now on building a life full of love, honesty, and strength. I was no longer willing to let anything or anyone, not even my sister's betrayal, hold me back. I had learned that some relationships are meant to evolve and others are meant to be left behind. I couldn't keep looking back, wishing for things to be different. I had to accept that sometimes people don't change in the ways you want them to. But I also realized that I had the power to change myself, to shape my own happiness, to prioritize my peace, and to ensure that my future was one I could be proud of. In those quiet moments, holding my baby, watching my husband care for our child, I understood that the best thing I could give my family was my own peace of mind. It wasn't about holding grudges, about waiting for apologies or expecting people to change. It was about letting go of the things I couldn't control and focusing on the things I could. The future no longer seemed uncertain or overwhelming. It was full of possibilities. I knew that life would present new challenges, but I had learned how to face them. I had learned that life doesn't always go as planned, and that's okay. It's how you respond to the challenges, how you grow and learn from them, that truly defines who you are. The past may have been painful, but it no longer held me captive. It had taught me valuable lessons that I would carry with me forever. And now I was ready to embrace whatever the future had in store. So, as I stood at this new threshold in my life, I made a promise to myself. I would never again let anyone's actions determine my happiness. I would not let the negativity, the hurt, or the betrayal weigh me down. I would build the life I deserved. My baby deserved that. My husband deserved that. I deserved that. And with that, I had come full circle. I had faced the hardest challenges, faced the darkest moments, but I had learned to rise above them. And now it was time to look forward with hope, gratitude, and the determination to live the life I had always dreamed of. If you found this story inspiring, if you've learned something from my journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Life is full of ups and downs, but how you handle them shapes your future. You have the strength to overcome anything. Don't let the past define you. Take control of your happiness today. Remember, the future is yours to create. Stay strong, stay resilient, and embrace the journey ahead.